What would you do if your family treated you like a failure while you were secretly building a billion-dollar empire? For years, she sat through family dinners in silence, listening to her parents praise perfect sister and dismiss her dreams as childish. But on one freezing Christmas Eve, after being told to sleep in the garage so her sister's powerful boss could have the guest room, everything changed. Because the failure they mocked was actually the anonymous CEO CTO who had just acquired the very company her sister worked for. And when the truth finally came out, no one at that table was ready.
My name is Ruby. I am 32 and I'm secretly the CEO of a tech empire worth billions. My family has no clue. For years, they've mocked my career, shot down my dreams, and treated me like the black sheep. Tonight, at Christmas dinner, my sister Natalie smirked as Mom announced I'd be sleeping in the unheated garage because her boss got the guest room. My hands were shaking under the table. For 5 years, I've hidden my success and swallowed their insults. They have no idea that tomorrow, everything changes. Before I tell you how I went from a freezing garage to watching their jaws hit the floor, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like this. I grew up in a Boston suburb, in a family that only cared about traditional success. My parents, Valeria and William, had a very narrow view of what achievement looked like. We're talking prestigious schools, safe career paths, and the shiny trophies that came with them. My older sister, Natty, who's 38 now, was the golden child who checked every single box. She went to an Ivy League school, got her MBA, and landed a marketing director job at a big tech firm called Apex Industries. Every family dinner was basically a tribute to her latest success. My younger brother, Ethan, 28, just followed her lead. He went into finance, joined a big accounting firm, and just made junior partner. My parents practically beamed with pride whenever his name came up. And then there was me, the odd one out, the one they could never figure out what to do with. Since I was 10, I've been obsessed with computers and code. While other kids were playing video games, I wanted to know how they were made. I'd spend hours taking apart old gadgets and teaching myself how to program. My parents just thought it was a phase. Ruby, when are you going to join a real club? My mother would ask. Colleges want well-rounded students, not hermits. High school just made the gap between us even wider. While Natalie was class president and prom queen, I started a coding club that met in the computer lab at lunch. My ideas, which my teachers called innovative, were seen as just a lack of discipline at home. You jump from one thing to the next. My dad complained after I abandoned a half-built robot for a website I was designing. You need to finish things, like your sister. What they didn't get was that I wasn't quitting my projects. I was building on them. Each one taught me something new that I took to the next. College was supposed to be a fresh start. I enrolled in business school to make my parents happy, but I was secretly working on my startup. By my second year, I knew I had something big. A revolutionary cloud security platform that major companies were already sniffing around. When I decided to drop out and go all in, my family reacted like I'd just joined a doomsday cult. You're throwing your life away, my father said, his disappointment hanging heavy in the air. We didn't raise you to be a quitter. Even if this little project works, and it won't, what kind of life is that? My mother added. No security, no benefits, no real job. Natalie was home that weekend, and she just shook her head with that smug smile I hated so much. Not everyone is cut out for success, Mom. Some people just have to learn the hard way. After that, the comparisons never stopped. Every family get-together became a stage for Natalie's achievements set against the backdrop of my so-called failures. She'd roll up in her luxury car, wearing designer clothes, talking about her corner office and her team. My parents would proudly introduce her at parties, but change the subject when anyone asked about me. Natalie just closed a 7-figure marketing deal. My dad would boast to anyone who would listen. Ruby's still finding her way, my mom would say, trying to move on. The breaking point came 3 years ago at Thanksgiving. I had just locked down $2 million in seed funding. But when I tried to share the news, Natalie jumped in to announce her promotion to senior director. That's wonderful, honey, my mother cheered, totally ignoring the fact I was mid-sentence. As they all raised their glasses to Natalie, I made a choice. I would stop trying to get their approval, and more importantly, I would keep my success a complete secret. Let them think what they want. One day, when the time was right, they would learn the truth. That night, I founded Nexitech. What began as a security startup quickly grew into a tech powerhouse, landing huge clients. In 2 years, we had offices in 3 different cities. By year 3, we were international. I made strategic partnerships, bought smaller companies, and poured the profits back into growth, all while keeping myself out of the spotlight. As CEO, I decided to stay anonymous, using trusted executives for any public events. This was partly a business tactic to keep competitors guessing, but honestly, it was personal. I wasn't ready for my family to know. The stress of living a double life was huge. I owned a penthouse downtown, but told my family I was renting a tiny studio. I drove a 10-year-old Honda to family events, while my luxury cars sat in a private garage. They were always asking when I was going to get a real job while I was chairing board meetings for a company worth billions. 5 years after dropping out, I made our biggest move yet. We acquired Apex Industries, the very company where Natalie built her career. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Soon, my golden child sister would be working for the family screw-up, and she had no idea. The acquisition papers for Apex Industries landed on my desk 1 week before Christmas. I just sat there, tracing the logo, now with the Nexitech name right under it. 5 years of work led to this. The very company that fed my sister's ego was now mine. Should I draft the announcement for the Apex employees? My assistant, Diane, asked. I shook my head. Not until after the holidays. Let them enjoy their Christmas without worrying about corporate changes. What I didn't say was that I wanted one last Christmas with the old power dynamic, one last holiday where they were all completely, blissfully unaware. The annual invitation from my parents arrived by text, right on schedule. Christmas Eve dinner at 6. Let us know. There was no warmth, no excitement, just an instruction. I texted back that I'd be there, even though everything in me screamed not to go. 5 years of this had taught me exactly what to expect. It would be hours of Natalie bragging, my parents' thinly veiled disappointment, and my brother Ethan's silent agreement that I belonged at the bottom of the family food chain. Even though I had a fleet of luxury cars, I drove my old reliable Honda Civic to my parents' house on Christmas Eve. The beat-up car was part of my cover, but it was also a shield. A reminder that I had nothing left to prove to them. I pulled into the driveway right behind a brand new Jaguar I didn't recognize. Inside, I found out why. Natalie had brought a guest, Harold Winter, a senior vice president at Apex Industries. Her boss, the guy she'd been trying to impress for years. Ruby, you remember Harold, right? Natalie asked, knowing full well we'd never met. She was wearing a red designer dress that probably cost more than my supposed monthly rent. Harold stood beside her in a tailored suit, a Rolex glinting on his wrist. Actually, we haven't had the pleasure, I said, holding out my hand. I'd deliberately worn jeans and a plain sweater, playing my part to perfection. Ruby, there you are, my mother called from the kitchen. I could use a hand with the vegetables. Natalie and Harold are catching up with your father in the living room. And just like that, I was back in the old routine. Natalie held court in the living room while I was sent to the kitchen. I sliced carrots and peeled potatoes in silence, listening to the laughter coming from the other room. So, how's that new corner office, Harold? I heard my father ask. Natalie tells us the view of the harbor is something else. It is, William. Although I hear our mysterious new CEO has an even better one, Harold replied. My ears perked up. Technically, I did have a much better view from the top floor of the Nexitech tower. Have you even met this new CEO? My father asked. Nobody has, Natalie cut in. He's like a ghost, makes all these huge decisions that shake everything up, but never actually shows his face. Her face, I thought to myself, smiling down at the carrot I was chopping. Ruby, how's that little website thing you were working on? My father suddenly yelled, as if just remembering I existed. So, how's the little project going? I nearly bit my tongue. My little project, Aura AI, had just acquired her firm Stratton Global for $5 billion. It's getting there, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Sophia refilled her wine. You know, an intern spot is opening up in Marcus's division. It's not glamorous, but it'd be a real experience. I can make a call for you, she offered. The pity in her voice made my jaw clench. She had no idea her fiancé's entire career would soon be in my hands. Thanks, but I'm fine, I mumbled. Suit yourself, she shrugged, wandering back to the living room. As I finished with dinner, I overheard my parents whispering. At least Leo's career is on track, my mother sighed. I just worry about Clara, 32 and still playing with that computer stuff. Sophia's tried to help, my father added, but you can't help someone who won't help themselves. The familiar words stung, even after 5 successful years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from COO about the Stratton Global deal. Executive retention offers are drafted. Marcus Thorne is on the list as you instructed. A wicked little smile crept across my face. Marcus had no clue his professional fate was being decided by the woman dicing vegetables in the kitchen. The real breaking point came just before we ate. I stepped into the hall to answer a text and overheard Sophia and my mother in the guest room. We've put Marcus in here. Of course, my mother was saying. Your father and I are in our room, Leo's in his, and you've got yours. What about Clara? Sophia asked, her voice syrupy sweet. Well, the den couch is covered in presents, my mother replied. I thought the garage would work. It's just for one night. Perfect, Sophia laughed. The garage definitely fits her brand. She's used to that scrappy startup life anyway. My blood turned to ice. A garage in Chicago. In December. With no heat. My hands were shaking with rage as I slipped back to the kitchen, my face a perfect mask. 5 years of building an empire through their mockery, and my Christmas reward was a freezing garage. The dining room was a picture of holiday perfection. Crystal glasses sparkled, and the good china sat on the family tablecloth. It was a scene from a catalog, right down to the place cards that stuck me at the far end of the table, basically in another time zone. My mother had placed Marcus at the head of the table like a visiting king, with my father at the other end. Sophia was at Marcus's right, my mother at his left, and Leo sat beside Sophia. I was at the furthest corner next to an empty chair, a perfect symbol for my place in this family. To his credit, Marcus seemed a bit uncomfortable with the whole setup. A few times he caught my eye, a curious look on his face. So, Clara, he finally asked, what exactly do you do in tech? Before I could answer, Sophia let out a short laugh she tried to cover with a cough. Oh, Clara just dabbles in app stuff, she said dismissively. Nothing on the scale you're used to at Stratton. I work in generative AI, I replied, looking straight at Marcus, mostly for enterprise logistics. A flicker of genuine interest crossed his face. Really? That's a huge growth area for us. We're looking at acquisitions in that space. What models do you use? Marcus, Sophia interrupted, laying a hand on his arm. Don't be a bore. Tell them about the Singapore deal. And just like that, the conversation moved on without me. I watched Marcus hesitate, then he followed Sophia's leads, telling us a story about his firm's global reach. My brief moment of connection vanished. Dinner continued just as it always did. Sophia dominated the conversation with tales of her big clients and strategic genius. My parents listened, nodding and beaming with pride. Leo would occasionally add his own successes, getting the same validation. My own comments were met with polite disinterest before the topic was quickly changed. It was a performance we had all perfected. The food is amazing, Valerie, Marcus remarked, finishing his potatoes. You've really outdone yourself. Thank you, Marcus, my mother replied, glowing. It's so wonderful to have everyone here. Speaking of, my father cut in. We should sort out where everyone's sleeping. It's getting late. My stomach twisted into a knot. Here it comes. Marcus, the guest room is all ready for you, my mother announced. Fresh towels are in the bathroom. Sophia, you'll have your old room, of course, my father continued, and Leo's already settled. All eyes turned to me, and I saw a flash of discomfort on my parents' faces. Clara, my mother started, her voice falsely bright. We've set up the garage for you. There's a camping cot and plenty of blankets. I saw Sophia smirk as Leo suddenly became fascinated by his plate. The garage isn't heated, I stated flatly. You can use a space heater. My father offered as if it was a generous compromise. It won't be that bad. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. The garage? But it's freezing outside. Clara doesn't mind, Sophia chimed in quickly. She's always been the adventurous one, right, sis? The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. At that moment, I knew she had planned this, bringing Marcus to make sure I was the one left out in the cold. I'm sure we can find another solution, Marcus suggested, looking uneasy. It's all right, I replied, my voice much calmer than I felt. I have to work tonight anyway. After dinner, my mother showed me to the garage to see my accommodations. What I found was even worse than I had imagined. The space was crammed with storage boxes, old gym equipment, and dusty Christmas decorations. In the middle was a saggy camping cot. A pile of mismatched blankets sat at one end next to a small ancient space heater. It's just for one night, my mother repeated, avoiding my eyes. And you're always on that laptop of yours, so you probably won't even notice. I said nothing as she retreated back to the warmth of the house. Once the door clicked shut, I sat on the cot and pulled out my phone. The weather app showed 25 degrees. It couldn't be much warmer in here. I opened my laptop and saw an urgent message from my executive team. They needed my final approval on the Stratton Global acquisition before the announcement. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, an email would hit every employee's inbox, including Sophia's and Marcus's, announcing Aura AI as their new parent company. It would also introduce me as the CEO. As I reviewed the documents, a plan began to form in my mind. Why wait until tomorrow morning? Why not take control of this narrative right now? My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, ready to send the executive briefing tonight if you give the go-ahead. All department heads at Stratton will be notified at once. I glanced at the clock. It was 8:30 on Christmas Eve. Marcus and Sophia would both get the notification as senior staff. Marcus's reaction would be very hard to hide. My finger hovered over the reply. 5 years of hiding, 5 years of their disrespect. Was I really going to let them banish me to a freezing garage on Christmas Eve? The garage door creaked open and Marcus stepped inside, looking sheepish. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I just wanted to see if you were okay. It's really cold." Before I could answer, his phone buzzed, and then it buzzed again and again. He pulled it from his pocket, frowning. "That's odd. Urgent messages from the executive team on Christmas Eve." He opened the first email and his expression shifted from confusion to pure shock. "This says Stratton Global has been acquired by Aura AI," he stammered, looking straight at me. "Effective immediately." But that can't be right. We would have been notified. His phone buzzed and he answered immediately. "Mark Dawson." "Yes, I just got the emails." No, I had no clue. "The CEO wants to speak with me now on Christmas Eve." As he listened, his eyes went wide and he turned slowly to look at me. Seriously? He was really seeing me now. Recognition dawned as he put the pieces together. She's right here," he whispered into the phone, his voice strained. The garage suddenly felt ice cold as Mark stared, phone pressed to his ear. I could faintly hear my SOO asking if he was certain he was with Ava Chen, CEO of Lyra Dynamics. "I believe so," Mark replied cautiously, his eyes never leaving mine. I reached for the phone. "May I?" He handed me his cell like a robot. The moment was unreal, sitting on a broken-down cot in my parents' messy garage, about to shatter 5 years of lies. "David," I said, my voice crisp and executive, a tone my family had never heard. "Yes, I'm here with Mark. The timeline's been accelerated. Please proceed with the full announcement to the executive board tonight. We'll inform the rest of the staff tomorrow." I could feel David's confusion through the line. "Tonight, ma'am? It's Christmas Eve." "I'm aware of the date," I said, watching the blood drain from Mark's face. "Certain circumstances have changed. Please proceed now." When I hung up, I handed the phone back to Mark, who took it like it was a hot coal. "You're the CEO of Lyra," he said, more as a statement to himself than a question. "You acquired Summit." "I did," I confirmed, closing my laptop. "But he gestured vaguely around us. The garage, the camping cot, the little space heater, fighting the December air. Sleeping in a garage on Christmas, I finished for him." "Yes, it appears so." The back door opened and my sister Chloe appeared, phone clutched in her hand. Her face was ashen. "Mark, did you get those emails?" "Something is happening with the company. They're saying we've been bought." By her voice died as she saw the look on Mark's face, then followed his gaze to me. "What is going on?" "Maybe we should take this inside," I suggested, getting up from the cot. "It's freezing out here." In a daze, Mark and Chloe followed me into the house. Warm air hit my face as we walked into the kitchen where my parents and brother Ethan were cleaning up. "All settled in already?" my mom asked, not looking up from the sink. "There's been a slight change of plans," I said evenly. "We need to talk." Something in my voice must have cut through because my mother turned, a wet cloth in her hand. My father looked up from drying a plate and Ethan paused midway to the dishwasher. "What's wrong?" my father asked, his eyes darting between me and the stunned faces of Chloe and Mark. Mark's phone rang again, splitting the tense air. He glanced at the caller ID, then at me, unsure what to do. "You should probably get that," I told him. "It's likely the CFO with your new retention offer." His eyebrows shot up, but he answered, putting it on speaker without thinking. "Mark, it's Greg from finance. Did you see the announcement? Lyra Dynamics bought us and their CEO wants to meet with all department heads immediately. Word is she's been working undercover inside the company or something. Do you know anything?" The kitchen went dead silent. 5 pairs of eyes were now locked on me. "Greg, I'll call you back," Mark said weakly, hanging up. Ava Chloe started, her voice unnaturally high. "What is he talking about? What is all this?" I looked around at my family, in the very kitchen where I'd spent years feeling like a ghost. The moment I had both feared and craved for 5 years was finally here. "I'm the founder and CEO of Lyra Dynamics," I said simply, "and as of last week, I own Summit Innovations." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's dishcloth dropped from her hand to the floor. My father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Ethan stood frozen, a dinner plate hovering between his hands and the dishwasher. Chloe broke the silence with a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible. Lyra's worth billions. It's one of the biggest tech firms in the country." "Yes," I agreed. "It is. But you dropped out of college," my father stammered. "You were working at some little startup." "That little startup was Lyra," I explained, "and it hasn't been little for a very long time." "You're lying," Chloe accused, but a sliver of doubt was now in her eyes. This has to be some kind of sick joke. In response, I took out my phone and opened a secure app linked directly to the Lyra network. I typed in my credentials and turned the screen to them, showing the CEO-level dashboard. This is real-time data from our worldwide operations, I said. Our current valuation is just over 11 billion. We have 7,000 employees on 4 continents, and as of last week, that includes everyone at Summit Innovations. Mark began nodding slowly, as if it was all making sense. The new security protocols, the management restructure, the big push to cloud services, that was you. Every last bit of it, I confirmed. But why? Why didn't you tell us? My mother finally managed to ask. All this time, we thought, you thought I was a failure, I finished her sentence. You made that perfectly clear. At every single holiday, every family dinner, every phone call. We were worried about you, my father protested. We wanted you to have security. No, I corrected him. Years of buried anger finally surfacing. You wanted me to be Chloe, to follow the life path you understood. When I chose a different one, you decided I was lost. You never once asked what I was building or showed the slightest bit of interest in my work. That's not fair, Chloe cut in. We tried to help you. I sent you job postings. You offered me entry-level assistant jobs and spoke to me like I was a child, I countered. You brought your boss to Christmas dinner and had me banished to the garage just so you could impress him. Mark flinched, looking deeply uncomfortable. I had no idea you were in the garage, he said quietly. I never would have stayed for dinner if I'd known. My mother stepped closer, her face holding an expression I'd never seen aimed at me before, respect, mixed with a little fear. Ava, honey, if we'd known about your success, of course we would have supported you. We always want what's best for you. Please, don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't pretend you would have treated me any differently if you knew I had money. That just makes it so much worse. The kitchen was silent again. My phone was buzzing nonstop with alerts as the news ripped through the leadership at both companies. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the windows white. So, what happens now? Ethan asked, the first to speak. With Summit, I mean. For most employees, it's business as usual, I explained, grateful for a practical question. There will be some restructuring at the top, but no mass layoffs are planned. Chloe's face went from pale to a sickly gray as she wondered, am I fired? The question just hung in the air. 5 years ago, I might have enjoyed this, holding my sister's career in my hands. Now, the moment just felt hollow. No, Chloe, you're not getting fired, I said. Your marketing campaigns have been effective, despite our personal issues. But starting next month, you'll be reporting to a new vice president. Relief washed over her, instantly replaced by a new worry. Is everyone going to find out we're sisters? That's up to you, I told her. I kept my identity private for business reasons, not just family ones. That's going to change now, but we can figure out how to handle our relationship at work. My father cleared his throat, trying to merge his image of me with this new person. Where do you live? He asked suddenly. You always said you had a tiny apartment downtown. I have a penthouse on the harbor, I said, and homes in New York and San Francisco, near our other main offices. My mother collapsed into a kitchen chair, looking completely overwhelmed. All this time, we had no idea. That was the point, I admitted. After years of trying to earn your approval, I just stopped. I made the company my priority instead. Mark's phone rang again. He gave me an apologetic look before stepping into the hall to answer. I could hear his voice shift into executive mode, the senior VP suddenly managing a corporate crisis. Chloe just stared at me like I was a total stranger. And in a lot of ways, I was. The neat little box she'd put me in, the little sister she ignored or patronized, had never really been real. I guess I should get my things from the garage, I said, cutting through the heavy silence. I'll book a hotel for the night. No, my mother cried out, jumping up. You can't leave. It's Christmas Eve. Your family. The irony of her sudden urgency was not lost on anyone. The guest room is ready, my father added quickly. Mark can have the den, or the garage if he needs it. I will not put anyone in that garage, I said firmly, not for a single night. Mark came back in, slipping his phone into his pocket. That was the chairman of the board. They're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. He looked at me with a whole new kind of respect. Your people work fast, he said. Efficiency is our core principle at Helios Systems, I told him. The entire vibe in the room had shifted. My family just stood there in their own kitchen, suddenly like strangers. The power balance that had defined us for years was gone in 15 minutes. I need some air, Megan said, heading for the back door. After a second, I went after her. A thin blanket of fresh snow covered the back deck, glittering under the porch light. Megan leaned on the railing, her breath fogging up the cold night air. Are you actually going to keep me on? She asked, not looking at me. Or was that just for show, back there? I walked over to the railing beside her and promised her it wasn't. I meant every word. Your work is good, Megan. Our history doesn't change that. She gave a slow nod, her eyes still on the yard. I've been so awful to you. Yes, I said simply. You have. And now you're my boss. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. God, the irony. Life's funny that way, I replied. Finally, she turned to face me. Why didn't you say something? All those years I was bragging about Vantage, knowing you could buy and sell us 10 times over. Why let me make a fool of myself? I paused for a moment, trying to find the honest answer. In the beginning, it was just survival. The company was growing, but it was still fragile. Then, it just became a habit, and maybe a small part of me was just waiting. Waiting for what? She asked. For any of you to see me, I admitted, to be curious about my life without knowing what I'd built, to value me for who I was, not for what I had. Tears welled up in Megan's eyes, a sight I hadn't seen since we were kids. I don't think I know how to do that anymore. It was maybe the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I stepped back inside to get my overnight bag from the garage, walking past my family, who all looked like they were frozen in place. When I came back in, I saw Mark gathering his things from the guest room. I called for a car, he told me. I figure it's best if I give you all some space tonight. You don't have to leave, I said. I think I do, he replied with a wry smile. Besides, I've got 100 emails to get through before the morning. Apparently, my new boss is pretty demanding. For the first time all night, I felt a real smile start to form. Is that what you heard? Her reputation is legendary, he said, then got more serious. For what it's worth, you've built something incredible. That security framework you developed changed the whole industry. I'm actually excited to see what you do with Vantage. With that surprising bit of support, Mark left, leaving me alone with my family to deal with the fallout. The living room had never been this quiet. We all sat in our usual spots, but nothing felt normal. My parents were in their matching armchairs. Leo was sitting on the arm of the couch. Megan was curled up in the corner and I was on the ottoman. All of us separated by a whole lot more than just a few feet of carpet. Finally, my dad broke the silence. A tech empire. It wasn't really a question, but I nodded. Yes. And you've been running it this whole time while we thought... My mother's voice trailed off, unable to say the words. While you thought I was failing, I finished for her. Yes. Megan stared down at her hands. Why hide it for so long? Why not just tell us? The question was simple, but the answer was a mess of years of hurt and disappointment. At first, it was because I had to prove it to myself, I began. I was scared to talk about my big plans in case I failed. But as the company got bigger, I realized something. You never asked about my work before. Why would money make a difference? What I wanted wasn't your approval of my success, but your belief in me, in my vision. We always believed in you, my mother said, but her voice was weak. No, I answered, my voice firm but quiet. You believed in a version of me that didn't exist. The daughter who would follow in Megan's footsteps. When I chose my own path, you stopped believing. My father shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. We were just worried about you, he said. That's what parents are for. I explained the difference between being concerned and being dismissive. You never once asked me about my business plan or what my goals were. You just assumed I was playing entrepreneur. Leo cleared his throat. I remember you tried to tell us about your first round of funding. Mom cut you off to ask Megan about her new car. My mother's face went red. I don't remember that. I do, Megan said softly. I remember thinking it didn't matter, because whatever Clara was doing couldn't possibly be as important as my promotion. That confession just hung in the air between us. In all our years of rivalry, Megan had never once admitted her role in making me feel small. So what does Helios Systems actually do? Leo asked, his voice genuinely curious. Besides buying Vantage, I mean. For the first time all night, I felt a little spark of hope. A real question about my work, not my bank account. We started with next-gen cloud security, I explained. The protocols I wrote became the industry standard in about 2 years. After that, we expanded into integrated systems, data privacy, and now AI applications for major corporations. Leo nodded, taking it all in. So Vantage was a strategic buy. Their hardware completes your software ecosystem. Exactly, I said, impressed he got it so fast. And you did all this without a college degree? My father asked. His tone was hard to place. The skills I needed, I learned myself, I said. For everything else, I hired people who knew more than I did. That's the mark of a good CEO. My mother suddenly stood and walked into the kitchen. She came back holding a magazine that was buried under a stack of mail. The cover showed a figure in silhouette with the headline, Helios and its shadow CEO, Tech's most powerful ghost. This came with the Denver Business Journal last month, she said, her voice tight. I never made the connection. I didn't even read the article. The irony was suffocating. Proof of my success had been sitting right on their coffee table unread. Does this mean you're rich? My dad asked awkwardly. Yes, I said, it's keeping it simple. Very. Megan made a noise that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. All those times I offered you money to help you get back on your feet. Oh my God, you must have thought I was such a joke. I wasn't laughing, I told her. Honestly, it hurt. being seen as a charity case while I was building something I was so proud of. Are you going to fire me? She asked again, the fear that had been gnawing at her all night finally spilling out. I already told you no, I said gently. Your job is safe. Your reporting structure will change, that's all. She nodded, relief washing over her face. I don't deserve that from you. It's not about being deserving, I corrected her. It's business. You're good at your job, and our personal issues have nothing to do with that. My father leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees. I don't know what to say, Clara. We were wrong about you, just completely and totally wrong. It was the closest I'd ever get to an apology from him. I hid the truth from you, I admitted. That part is my fault. But we gave you a reason to, my mother said quietly. We made you feel like you had to hide your wins instead of celebrating them. A heavy silence settled over the room again. You don't just erase years of family history in one night, no matter what comes out. So where do we go from here? Leo finally asked the practical question. It was the one hanging over all of us. How do you fix relationships that were built on a lie? How do you move forward when the past has been completely rewritten? I don't know, I confessed. This isn't how I wanted to tell you. I'm still trying to figure it all out myself. Will you stay the night? My mother asked, her voice laced with a little desperation. Not in the garage, obviously. The guest room is all yours. The thought of staying here, of trying to sleep in this house with all these new emotions flying around, was overwhelming. But leaving on Thanksgiving Eve felt even worse. I'll stay, I decided, but I have to make a few calls first. The news is out to the executive team, and there are going to be questions. My father nodded, and for the first time I saw real respect in his eyes. Of course! You've got a company to run. That simple acknowledgement of my work, something I had wanted from him my whole life, felt surprisingly good. As I stood up to get my laptop, Megan stood up too. Let me help you move your things to the guest room, she offered, a small peace offering. We walked to the garage in total silence. The space felt colder now, the insult of the camping cot even sharper after tonight's revelations. I'm sorry about this, Natalie said, pointing to the cot. It was my idea. You thought it would be funny to make me sleep in a freezing garage on Christmas Eve? I asked, my eyebrow raised. To her credit, she looked ashamed. It sounds bad when you say it like that. Because it was bad, I said flatly. Whether I was a struggling artist or a billionaire, it was cruel. She nodded, accepting it. I've spent so many years seeing you as my competition, not my sister. I don't know how to stop. Maybe that's where we start, I suggested, grabbing my bag, by not competing, by just being sisters. As we walked back inside, a text from Leo buzzed on my phone. Car's here. Heading downtown. The board is briefed and fully supports your leadership. Merry Christmas, boss. The message made me smile, at least in a business sense. The takeover was going off without a hitch. My mother had made up the guest room with fresh towels and turned down the bed, her own silent apology. My father had a fire roaring in the fireplace, trying to warm a house that had felt so cold to me just hours before. That night, lying in a real bed instead of the garage cot, I replayed the day's insane turn of events. 5 years of hiding my life, gone in a single moment. 5 years of distance from my family, suddenly closed by a truth I never planned to tell. Tomorrow would be chaos, the formal announcement to all of Apex's employees, the press releases naming me as CEO, and the endless questions about why I'd stayed hidden for so long. But for now, in the quiet, I felt something I didn't expect. Relief. The weight of the secret was finally gone. Whatever came next, I'd face it as myself, not as two separate people. Across the hall, I heard Natalie on the phone, her voice low and urgent, likely talking to her team at Apex. I could hear my parents' soft voices from their room, probably wondering about the stranger their daughter had become. We were still a broken family, but for the first time in years, we were at least starting to look at each other. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. It wasn't quite understanding either, but it was a beginning. Christmas morning dawned with a tense quiet hanging in the air, thicker than the smell of coffee. I woke up early, a force of habit, and found my father already in the kitchen, staring into his mug like it held all the answers. Merry Christmas, I said, breaking the silence. He jumped. Merry Christmas, Clara. Can I get some coffee? He poured me a cup with a strange amount of focus, as if serving a new client instead of his daughter. Did you sleep okay? Better than I would have in the garage, I said, a little jab I couldn't resist. He actually winced. About that, it was wrong. I just want you to know I didn't realize how cold it was. It wasn't a real apology, but it was the closest I'd gotten in years, so I took it with a nod. I have to make some calls before everyone's up, I told him, checking my phone. The official notice goes out to all Apex staff at 9. Of course, he said, then added awkwardly, should I give you some privacy? The question just showed how little he knew about my world. No, this is fine. I'm used to working from anywhere. He watched with a new kind of curiosity as I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, the very same table where I'd done my homework as a kid. While I fired off emails and approved the final press release, I could feel him watching me, really seeing me work for the very first time. By 8:30, the rest of the family had slowly made their way into the kitchen. My mother was making a big show of breakfast, whipping up fancy French toast that definitely wasn't on the original menu. Natalie kept checking her phone, waiting. Ethan just watched all of us, like he was observing a fragile truce. "Should we do gifts now or after we eat?" my mother asked, desperate to pretend things were normal. "After's fine," I said, closing my laptop as the clock neared 9. "The announcement is going out right now." As if on cue, an email notification pinged on Natalie's phone. She read it, her face a blank mask, then she looked right at me. "It's official," she said. "Nexitech Dynamics has acquired Apex Industries, effective immediately. Clara Montgomery, founder and CEO of Nexitech, will address all employees after the holiday." My parents just stared at each other, the new reality finally sinking in. "Montgomery," my father repeated. "You kept our family name." "Of course I did," I replied. "No matter what's happened between us, I'm still a Montgomery." I saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe it was pride. Breakfast was a minefield of awkward small talk. Everyone tiptoed around years of anger while trying to figure out how to act now. When we finally moved to the Christmas tree, the difference was stark. The gifts told the story. There were the usual thoughtful presents for Natalie and Ethan, and then the obligatory ones for me, clearly bought with zero thought. A generic scarf, a bath set from the pharmacy, a bestseller I'd never read. But what they didn't expect was the neat pile of gifts I'd brought, the ones I almost left in the car when I was about to book a hotel. Each one was wrapped in simple, elegant paper, holding things I'd picked out months ago. "You brought gifts?" my mother asked, her surprise obvious. "Of course," I said. "It's Christmas." I started handing them out. For my father, a rare first edition of his favorite business book, signed. For my mother, a handmade jewelry box holding a necklace from a designer she'd mentioned loving once. For Ethan, a high-end watch he always wanted but would never buy for himself. And for Natalie, a leather portfolio with her initials, filled with special Japanese paper she became obsessed with after a trip to Tokyo last year. The shock on their faces as they opened them was absolute. It was proof that even when they weren't paying attention to my life, I was paying attention to theirs. "How did you know about the necklace?" my mother whispered, touching the small pendant. "I think I mentioned it one time, years ago." "I listen," I said simply. "I've always been listening." My father cleared his throat, obviously moved by the book. "This must have been impossible to find." "Not impossible," I said. "It just took a little work." Natalie ran a hand over the embossed leather. "You remember Tokyo." "You talked about that paper for weeks after you got back," I reminded her. "You said you'd never felt anything like it." They shot each other awkward looks, the gap between their generic presents and my personal ones saying everything. "We have something else for you," my mother announced, rushing into her bedroom. She came back holding a small, hastily wrapped gift. "We got this morning. Your father ran to the 24-hour store while you were on your calls." Inside was a silver picture frame. It held a cheap printout of the magazine article about Nexitech, the one they'd ignored. "We thought maybe you could sign it," my father said, looking at the floor, "since you're the mystery CEO they wrote about." It was a clumsy move, but it was the first time they had ever acknowledged my work. I took it and gave a small smile. "Thank you." As the morning wore on, something really did shift between us. My parents started asking about Nexitech, shyly at first, then with real interest as I told them the story of how I built it. Ethan started asking smart questions about my business model. Even Natalie, once she was sure her job was safe, started to engage with actual curiosity. "So all those times you were buried in your laptop during holidays, you were running a billion-dollar company?" Ethan asked, his mind blown. "Pretty much," I said. "Last Thanksgiving, I was closing a major acquisition deal while you all thought I was ignoring you to play a game." "Is that why you always left gatherings early?" my mother asked. "Because of work?" I paused, trying to find the right words. "Work was part of it, yes, but it was also because being here was hard for me. Because of how we treated you," my father said, his bluntness shocking me. "Yes," I admitted. "It's difficult to sit for hours feeling like the family failure." A thick silence fell over the room. My mother wiped at her eyes. "I found some old photos," she said suddenly, grabbing an album from a shelf. "From when you were in high school, in that computer club." She opened it to a page showing a teenage me, standing with a group of friends, proudly holding up a trophy from a coding competition we'd won. "A science fair my parents decided to skip." "You won the grand prize," she said, her finger tracing the blue ribbon in the old photograph. "I remember that." We missed it because Chloe had a soccer final the same day. It's okay, I said on autopilot, so used to my wins being overlooked that it didn't even sting. No, it's not. My father cut in. We should have been there for you. One of us, at least. Chloe peered at the picture over Mom's shoulder. I didn't know you were into all that. I was just so wrapped up in my own world. You were taught to be, I replied, without any heat. We all played the parts our family assigned us. The talk continued right through lunch, slowly untangling years of crossed wires. No big dramatic apologies, no tear-filled hugs. Just a quiet, growing awareness of the roles we'd all been playing. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my head of communications. The press release went out. Your inbox is exploding with congratulations and interview requests. The PR's team is handling everything. It's all going to plan. I passed the phone to Chloe, whose stress about the merger was written all over her face. It'll be fine, I promised her. The integration specialist will handle the heavy lifting. Your day-to-day isn't going to change that much. Except now my little sister is the CEO. She shot with a smirk. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in a long, long time. Well, there is that, I conceded. That evening, we gathered for dinner, far more relaxed than the formal affair the night before. The conversation actually flowed, free of all the secrets and old resentments. My father asked about Helios dynamics and our future projects. My mother about my apartment in London. Leo was curious about my leadership style. And Chloe amazingly told stories about Summit Corp, asking for my take and closing the gap between our worlds. She admitted that launching their new data privacy platform was a complete marketing disaster. We could never make the average customer understand why they needed it. That's a classic problem in our field, I agreed. It's the trap of selling tech specs instead of human benefits. At Helios, we design everything backward. We start with what the user needs to feel, and then we build the technology to make it happen. That's brilliant, she said, and for the first time, I heard genuine professional respect in her voice. For just a second, I saw what we could have been allies instead of rivals. And I realized it wasn't too late to build that. Later, as we were all having coffee in the living room, my father finally asked the question that was hanging in the air all day. Why did you hide all this from us, Amelia? I get the business reasons for staying anonymous, but why from your own family? This was it. The real heart of the matter, the question underneath every conversation since the big reveal. I needed to see if you could love me for me, not for what I'd built, I answered honestly. I wanted to be valued for my mind, my drive, my spirit, not for my bank account or my title. And we failed you, my mother whispered. Yes, I said, until yesterday you did. So what happens now? Leo asked. What does this mean for us? I looked around at their faces, so familiar but lit differently by this new truth between us. Now, we start over, I said. Not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by refusing to let it define our future. As Christmas Day ended, I realized something. The big reveal of my secret life hadn't brought the triumphant I told you so moment I'd imagined. It created something better, something quieter, a real chance to connect. We weren't fixed. There were still years of hurt and bad habits to unlearn. But for the first time since I was a kid with a crazy dream nobody understood, I felt seen by them. Not perfectly, not completely, but truly. It was a beginning. 6 months after that game-changing Christmas, I stood on the deck of my lake house, watching my family pull up for a summer get-together. The shift in our dynamic was obvious in how easily they walked up to my home, no longer awkward or tiptoeing around me. My mom gave me a real hug, a universe of away from the stiff greetings of the past. This house is gorgeous, Amelia. You have to show me every single room this time. My dad followed, holding a bottle of good scotch and a business magazine. You're on the cover again. Figured we'd add it to the collection. Since that Christmas, my parents had cleared a shelf in their study for articles and awards about my work. Their pride was finally out in the open, not just reserved for Chloe and Leo anymore. Our weekly family video calls had become a real thing, not just duties to be checked off a list, but actual conversations. My parents now bragged about their tech genius daughter to their friends, sometimes getting us a little too carried away with the details of my latest ventures. Chloe was the last to arrive, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. The acquisition had been a rough transition at first, but she'd finally found her place in the new company structure. Our work relationship had started to grow right alongside our personal one, each making the other stronger. The marketing department is loving the new product roadmap, she said as we started making dinner together, something we had never done before. The test audiences are reacting exactly like you predicted. Your presentation to the board last month was a masterclass, I told her. It was sharp, compelling, and you had all the data to back it up. She lit up at the praise. I learned from the best. Leo came into the kitchen, his laptop open. Can I pick your brain for a minute? I'm thinking of launching a small venture capital fund for green tech startups. I've drafted a business plan. This was new, too. After Christmas, Leo's had asked me for career advice, which sparked his own entrepreneurial ambitions. I had become the mentor he never knew he needed, and our bond was deepening over our shared business interests. As we all sat around the table on the deck overlooking the lake, I thought about how much had changed in just half a year. It wasn't just about the surface level stuff, like our work and family lives mixing. It was the deep, internal shifts that let us finally see each other clearly. I've been thinking, my father said as dinner wound down, about what you said at Christmas. About wanting to be seen for who you are, not for what you've done. I nodded, remembering the conversation that started it all. I realized that's what I always wanted, too, he continued. I built my identity on my career, on my success. I pushed that same pressure onto all of you, especially you, Amelia, because you were who always pushed back. It was maybe the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. I think we were all stuck in that trap, Chloe added, measuring our self-worth by what we achieved. I was so afraid of no longer being the golden child that I couldn't be happy for anyone else's win. Especially yours, she admitted, looking right at me. Because you did it all on your own terms, and somehow that made your success feel like my failure. As the conversation drifted into the warm evening, I thought about how much I'd changed, too. The burden of my secret had been heavier than I ever knew. And being my true self with my family hadn't just healed us, it had healed me. I'd let go of needing their validation. And ironically, that's what finally allowed them to give it. I'd built boundaries but left the door open for them to walk through, finding strength in being vulnerable. Professionally, the impact had been just as massive. Stepping out as the founder of Helios Dynamics brought a lot of initial media attention, but it ultimately strengthened our brand. My own family drama inspired new company policies around mental health and supporting unconventional career paths. I'd also started mentoring young founders from underprivileged backgrounds, especially women whose brilliant ideas were too often ignored. That feeling was better than any business deal or product launch. Best of all, Chloe and I had become a powerhouse team, a true collaboration of our different talents. Her marketing instincts were the perfect match for my technical vision. We'd gone from rivals to partners. You remember the garage? My mother asked suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. The question once might have brought a flash of anger, but now I just smiled. It's kind of hard to forget. We renovated it, my dad said proudly. It's a proper home office for you now, for when you visit. We put in heated floors, good lighting, a big desk that looks out on the garden. The message was obvious, but so full of heart. The place that had always been a symbol of my isolation was now their invitation for me to come home. That's really nice, I said, genuinely touched. That's really, really nice. That night by the lake, everything felt so clear. I was thinking about how far our family had come, and the road still ahead. We weren't perfect, not by a long shot. Sometimes we'd fall back into the old ways, hurting each other without even meaning to. But we were changing, growing, and finally being real with one another. Last Christmas was the turning point. It burned away all the masks and forced us to truly see each other. It was painful, yeah, but necessary. It cleared the ground for something new to grow. I learned that real success isn't measured by achievements, but by how honest our connections are. It takes courage to be vulnerable, to break down old walls. The real prize isn't what you make, but who you become in the process. As my family got ready to leave, already planning our next get-together, I felt this deep sense of calm that no career win ever gave me. That old workshop where I used to hide out now feels like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of real connection. Have you ever felt like you had to hide a part of who you are from your family or friends? What do you think would happen if they discovered your secret talent? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes the people who doubt your dreams most are the ones who need to see you succeed.